So former President Jacob Zuma has been given the green light to explore private prosecution against the NPA's Billy Downer. Zuma is seeking to have Downer removed from his corruption trial, arguing that he's biased and doesn't have the title to prosecute. The former president also laid a criminal charge against Downer, accusing him of leaking his medical records. The background here is that the NPA's Director of Public Prosecutions in KZN has decided not to go after Downer, arguing that the charges against him are baseless and cannot be sustained. Let's unpack these latest developments for you now and bring in Advocate Gerrie, who's with AfriForum's private prosecution. In fact, she's the head of the unit there. Gerrie, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks as always for making time for us here on the AM Report. I want to start by just exploring what this certificate actually means, because in my mind, the certificate is the DPP in KZN saying that they're not going to prosecute in this matter, and that's what's opened the way for Zuma to explore private prosecution.
You're 100% correct, Ayanda. That's exactly what it means. The private prosecutor, which is Mr. Zuma, the certificate is issued in his name, and that we should know. So if you refer to this matter further, it would be Zuma versus Downer. So the certificate is issued in Mr. Zuma's name. He now, with the certificate, will be able to issue summons. But there's lots of things that will have to happen. Mr. Zuma will first have to deposit guarantees with the magistrates court. Guarantees that was determined by notice in the Government Gazette. That's one guarantee. And then more substantial guarantee, a guarantee of the cost of the accused in the matter should the prosecution fail. So that must happen. Then what's also important to realize now, Ayanda, is that Mr. Zuma will have only 3 months. He now has 3 months to institute prosecution. So from the date of the certificate, he has 3 months. And in that 3 months, lots of things must happen. They have to compile a docket. They have to present the charge sheet. They have to draft a charge sheet. They have to be ready. They have to summons Mr. Downer to court. And that all has to happen within a period of 3 months. Otherwise, the certificate lapses and a private prosecution would not be possible. Ayanda, but further, I think it's important to realize that the issuing of the certificate, although it initiates the private prosecution, Mr. Downer will have an option to approach the High Court to set aside this certificate. He might say that the certificate is just vexatious and it constitutes an abusive process, and that there's absolutely no prospect of success. If he approaches the High Court and is successful, then the High Court might set this certificate aside. So lots might happen, but things must happen quickly if Mr. Zuma wants to privately prosecute Mr. Downer. And it's also ironic that there will be 2 matters running at the same time, state versus Zuma, where Mr. Downer acts on behalf of the state, and Zuma versus Downer, where a council will act on behalf of Mr. Zuma in that prosecution.
Sure. So much coming out from that first response. Let me ask this as a first response question. If the former president isn't able to meet this 3-month deadline because of just how much needs to be done, is there an opportunity for the certificate to be reissued, or is that on that?
Well, there's a possibility for the certificate to be reissued if very cogent reasons are put forward why he was unsuccessful to do that. But in the normal scope of events, the certificate will lapse after a period of 3 months.
Sure. My second follow-up question is, you mentioned how essentially we've got parallel cases that are running. If the former president does, manage to kick off this private prosecution, can he use that case to stall the state versus Zuma case, if you get what I mean?
I'm sure that might be a very good option for Mr. Zuma to do, to use the prosecution of Mr. Downer to delay his trial even further. That's a possibility. I've read Mr. Maga's press release where Mr. Maga said that the prosecution service would support Mr. Downer and that Mr. Downer is still in charge of the team leading the prosecution against Mr. Zuma. But in reality, if we have 2 matters running, if we have a matter where Mr. Zuma succeeds in prosecuting Mr. Downer or succeeds in getting him to court, that will definitely impact the state versus Zuma matter.
Sure. This is a mischievous question, I'll say that up front. But, I mean, the DPP has also already come out to say that they find the allegations against Downer as baseless and cannot be substantiated. You work in the private prosecution space. If the former president were to approach you, assuming he hasn't, is this a case you take up?
No, I wouldn't. I'm saying that of what I know about the matter, there's very little prospect of success, if any. So if I'm approached to do this, knowing that we will have to pay security, we'll have to deposit security, I will not do that. That's firstly on the prospects of success. And secondly, I've been open about this over years. I've got the utmost respect for Mr. Downer. He's a friend of mine, and I would not take on this matter.
Well, okay. Talk about full disclosure. In any other case, though, I mean, how far back would a private prosecutor have to go, especially because so much of what Zuma is alleging here has been ventilated in one way or another in court. In other words, my question here is, would a private prosecutor have to reinvent the wheel in putting together this case, or can they rely on what's already been ventilated in this matter in other sittings?
They would be able to rely on what's been ventilated. They'll be able to rely on affidavits filed, but that will have to be compiled in a case docket, and the case docket will have to be disclosed to the accused before the trial starts. So they can really rely on any affidavits that have been deposed in this matter, but they will have to compile it in the form of a case docket and disclose the case docket to the accused before the trial starts.
All right, very interesting indeed. Advocate, now whilst I have you, I mean, let me take the liberty of asking you to weigh in on a completely different matter. We have watched for several days now the Senzo Miyawa trial continue in the High Court sitting in Pretoria. I can't help but take note of some of the remarks made again by the Miyawa family, who believe that with what they've seen in the trial as it unfolds, they think that the 5 accused here who are being accused of this murder are just scapegoats for a police cover-up. Is that something they've ventilated with you before?
No. My clients still believe that we have the 5 accused before court that were involved in the murder of Mr. Miyawa. As you know, there's a split in the family, and that some of the family members feel differently. They've been feeling differently from the start. It's very early days in a trial. The fact that the trial is just going on and on with one witness, although important and although there's lots of cross-examination, I really hope we can get to the evidence that leads with the merit of the matter, evidence that leads with how the accused are linked to this particular crime, and we will get there. I just don't know when, with the rate this is going, perhaps next year or even later, but we will get there, and I think it's very early days in the trial. I'm still confident that we have the correct people before court.
I want to make sure I don't put words in your mouth. Are you saying that we're spending too much time on this first witness?
You don't have to put words in my mouth. That's what I'm saying, yes.
That's interesting. So, in other words, as far as you're concerned, Thabo Mosia has said everything that you would need, essentially, as a private prosecutor, to move on with what you believe are the merits of this case.
Yes, I do think so. I think, let me just say that I know Advocate George Beloy very well, also a friend of mine. And I know he's sitting there, although it's carrying on. I don't think that he's overly concerned with what happened with the first witness, because he knows what will come, and he will just focus on what will come.
I know you said it's still pretty early days, but as far as you're concerned, is the picture clearing up when it comes to us ascertaining what actually happened that night? Or are you also still sitting with a lot of major unanswered questions?
Major unanswered questions. This is the first witness. It's what happened on the scene. I'm not saying that police did a sterling work on the scene. Definitely not. I'm really disappointed at what happened on the scene, and I think everybody is. But this isn't the major evidence in the matter. The major evidence will come later. And by saying that we've spent lots of time on Mr. Mosia, I think it's clear what the police did and did not do on the scene. But what's more important is that's not what the version of the accused are. The version of the accused is that it was a staged scene with something else in mind. And that, I think, will become clear later.
My last question on this. Is there anything out of these proceedings that's taken you by surprise?
No. I don't think I'm surprised by what happened. I'm very disappointed in the way that the scene was handled, but we knew this all along, and all the investigators involved, the new investigating team that was appointed, as well as the prosecution, we all knew that the scene wasn't treated in the way it should have been, and that we know what took me by surprise perhaps is all the applications that we had to listen to from day one, and I just hope that there will be no more applications of sorts and that we can get to the evidence.
Advocate Gerrie Nel, thanks for your indulgence. Really appreciate your time on the AM report. Advocate Nel is, of course, the head of AfriForum's Prosecutions unit. Once again, thanks very much indeed.